Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Male Perspective. I am your host, Lana Reid, and today I'm so happy, so pleased I have with me Mr. Tom Falkenstein. He is a cognitive behavioral psychotherapist, and he is the author of the book, The Highly Sensitive Man. Tom, thank you for hanging out with me. Welcome to the show.
Where am I? Thank you very much.
Where am I speaking to you from?
Thanks for having me. I'm based in Berlin, and I'm sitting in my study.
Okay, Berlin. One of the things I love about doing this show is I get to speak to guys all around the world. So Germany, I think, is a first for me to have a guest on the show. So I'm kind of tickled today. So thank you. So first of all, let's talk about your book here, The Highly Sensitive Man. So what exactly is a highly sensitive man?
Okay. So a high sensitivity is a temperamental trait that's been researched since the early 90s. The first person who really coined the term was Elaine Aron. She's written a book, The Highly Sensitive Person, that some of your listeners might have read, maybe. And what she basically found in her research is that about a particularly sensitive central nervous system. So that means they process information very deeply. They think a lot about what's going on in their lives. So they think a lot, they feel a lot, basically. So she came up with four criteria that you should have to be highly sensitive, and that is DOES, so depth of processing, which means you really process things very deeply. O for overstimulation. If you think and feel a lot, you become quickly overstimulated and stressed, and usually afterwards tired. E is for emotional reactivity. So those what I just mentioned, having strong feelings, positive and negative feelings. Also having quite a lot of empathy. That is important. She was able to show that in her. And S is being sensitive to subtle stimuli. So you really notice details in your environment, fine details in your environment very quickly. So you might be, sensitive to certain fabrics, or you might enter a room and quite quickly notice that it's quite warm in there, or you might be sensitive to the light in the room. So when we talk about high sensitivity, or sensory processing sensitivity, as it's called in the research, we really talk about, yes, an emotional sensitivity, but also a general high environmental sensitivity, if that makes sense. So you read these things around you and you respond to them quite sensitively. And that is the idea, basically. So it's a temperamental trait that's been researched for almost 30 years now. Elaine Aron is the one who did initially most work on it. And it occurs in men and in women. So therefore, highly sensitive men show those same characteristics that I just described.
Okay. Now, you mentioned one of the words that you mentioned as you were defining it was high sensitive people have empathy. So I'm wondering, is an empathetic or empath the same as a highly sensitive person, or is it two different things?
Yeah, Elaine Aron thinks they're two different things. So I know there's this whole movement, empath movement, and so she clearly separates it from that movement. So highly sensitive people have a lot of empathy, but I'm not sure how much this empath movement is based on research, whereas the high sensitivity idea, the concept is really based on solid empirical studies. So I would separate them personally, and I think she does as well.
Okay. Now, as I'm listening to you define what a highly sensitive person is, And then I'm thinking about how we as a society tend to put these labels on what manhood is or masculinity or whatever. It sounds like there might be some sort of conflicting message between a man who's highly sensitive and trying to live up to the expectations of manhood. Am I understanding this correctly?
Absolutely. And Lana, that's exactly why I wrote the book in the first place. So I'm a psychotherapist, and it was about 2000, it was around 2013. I was living, working as a psychotherapist in London, and I happened to see a lot of young men as clients, and they all talked about feeling very sensitive, being very sensitive, basically all their lives. So not a sensitivity that was linked to the current crisis they were having, like depression or anxiety. They were talking about an emotional sensitivity basically since their childhood. So that is very much what, when we talk about a temperamental trait, it's very much what Elaine Aron says. So it's not just a sensitivity that suddenly, comes up. It is going through your life, basically. And when I then tried to research a little, well, first of all, I wanted to, sort of try to show them that being sensitive as a man is not particularly negative, but they really felt it was because they often felt shamed, or they felt not good enough, not masculine enough in school or at work, or in relationship with their fathers or mothers even. And when I tried to find information about it, I found out about high sensitivity as a concept. And then I noticed that basically most of the books, really all of the books, are written by women, and seem to address the female reader, not the male reader. And it just didn't match my impression I had as a therapist from sessions with those, with young men in their early 20s. And their suffering seemed really quite strong. So I just thought, there was my motivation to write the book in the first place, because I just wanted to be able to, that there's a book out there that men can read who think they are quite sensitive to the environment, who get the sense they really think a lot, who, might react quite strongly with feelings, positive and negative, who feel quite quickly overstimulated. And I just felt the book, such a book wasn't available.
Okay.
And when I then started writing the book, I interviewed more men, and some of those interviews are included in the book. And what comes up quite a lot is that sense that if you identify as highly sensitive, you often felt already in your childhood that you weren't living up to the boy code, so maybe you weren't particularly competitive as a teenager, or as a, you didn't like competitive sports maybe, or
Okay.
you were always rather introverted, because high sensitivity, 70% of highly sensitive people are also introverted. So often they felt they didn't live up to the extroverted, stoic, masculine ideal, basically. And I think that is something that is particularly difficult for highly sensitive men. I wonder whether being particularly sensitive to environment is a little bit easier in some ways for women. Dealing with this is the same for men and for women, but I think in the society, in the context of society, I wonder whether it's a bit more challenging for men, because it just doesn't go with the masculine ideal we're still having in the Western world, I feel.
Okay. Listening to you talk, I'm thinking about some of the conversations that we have as women amongst women about men. And it seems like as women, we have some mixed perceptions, because we say we want our man to be masculine or manly. But then a lot of times I hear women complain like, oh, he never comes and talks to me. He never shares his feelings. He never, so we want sensitivity. We want the man to peel back those layers. But on the other side, we're saying we want this other guy. So I think we as women have some work to do, maybe in our perception of what a man is, what manhood is.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a dilemma, isn't it? And I think it's a dilemma a lot of men feel as well. They feel, they have to live up to certain ideals, or they have to present themselves in a particular way, and maybe it doesn't really go so well with how they feel inside. Or, but what I find really, I mean, I think I just looked at this a couple of years ago. The American Psychological Association, APA, published guidelines for therapists working with boys and men. And it's a really, really interesting document. I urge your listeners to look at it, even if you're not a therapist, just if you have an interest in it, because it really summarizes the issues that those very strict masculine norms create for men themselves. So it is, I think it's really, in terms of suicide, in terms of if you look at the numbers of the numbers of men in prison, if you look at mental health, depression, addiction, I mean, there are loads. If you look at the who drops out of university at the moment in Germany and in Britain, it is mostly men who drop out of universities, not women. So I just feel sort of this, those sort of very strict masculine norms that we still live with, and I feel can create quite a lot of problems, psychological, mental health, mental health problems, physical problems, not living particularly healthy, for example, engaging risky behaviors. So it is a problem, and yet they're still there, and they still have an influence.
Yes, they don't.
So I think it's really it's a real challenge, I think. Yeah, exactly, and that's why I think it's so important when you have children, or particularly when you have a boy, when you raise a boy, to be a good role model in terms of how to deal with feelings, to talk, not to overwhelm them, but to talk about feelings. I think a father who talks to his son about his feelings and maybe shares, obviously age appropriate, but who shares maybe some vulnerable feelings, I think is really important. I think not to shame boys or young men when they show vulnerable feelings. I think those are just very important things.
Okay.
But it's I think it's a dilemma. I think it's a bit of we want this, but we also want that, and
trying to package it up nice and neatly there. Now, you mentioned that I think you said 70% of highly sensitive people tend to be introverts, if I remember.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So this term introvert, I think it's really elevated, escalated itself, especially with today's technology, because we spend our time behind these computers and our phones. I think it makes us more introverted. But what is this? Why is being introverted more common with highly sensitive people? Because it seems like, for me, a highly sensitive person would be in tune with people and let me help you and let me get out there. And, like what would you be? The community volunteer, or, the doctor, I'm going to save the day, or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Elaine Aron thinks that it is linked to feeling so quickly overstimulated, and if you process a lot very deeply and you interact with a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings, and you become quicker overstimulated, therefore you need more downtime. So she has this idea that therefore people are more introverted in their personality style. The majority of highly sensitive people are introverted in their personality style because they need time to withdraw, they need downtime, they need time on their own, they need time to reflect, to process what they have experienced or you still might you might need a bit of downtime to process what happened during your day, for example. So I think that makes quite a lot of sense to me, that if you if you respond to your environment quite quickly and strongly, that you then also need time to go away, so to speak, and get some downtime. So I think that makes sense. So but I think you're right. On the other hand, if you have a lot of empathy, and you read very subtle social cues, because that would be the S again of the, in terms of the DOES that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the sensitivity to subtle stimuli. Of course, it also happens in the social context. So you might be actually, quite good at reading people, or you might, respond with a lot of empathy, or you might really think a lot what, the other person says. So in some ways, you might be quite good for those helping professions, and it might come in handy if you're, particularly sensitive. But on the other hand, I think it also highlights how important it is to step back and to get your downtime, and not be surrounded by people all the time.
Understood. Okay, understood. Now,
but just to link it back, but I think then again we have got another issue, because I think the masculine ideal in the Western world is not one of an introvert.
Yes.
I mean, I think when we think about men and the ideal, it's a bit of a cliche, but those terms like stoic and strong and extroverted, I think.
Yes.
So but the majority of highly sensitive people are introverted.
Yeah. I have quite a few male friends, and they're extroverted, and they're always front and center, and and I'm like, but I've always teased them. I said, you're just putting on a show. That's not really, but it is what it is. Some of these societal labels and upbringing and messages, it's hard for some men to kind of shed.
Yes.
I guess my next question is, because we're coming to a place in life or in this world where we're becoming more understanding the messages out there. So in interpersonal relationships, be it a woman who runs across a man who's highly sensitive, or maybe a mother or a father who's notices that their boy might be highly sensitive, how are some ways that we should be interacting with them in a healthy manner that helps them blossom and bloom into their best selves, instead of being chaotic and neurotic or whatever? What are some things that we can do to help the highly sensitive person?
Yes, I think first of all, I'm not a child therapist. I don't work with children, but I think what I said earlier, I think that is really important, that your son or your daughter's highly sensitive. I think it's really, first of all, important just to be aware of the concept, to be aware of the research, and to know that something like this exists.
Okay.
I think that is important. I think because it's been researched now for almost 30 years, but still some people just don't know about it. So I think it is, first of all, important to know it's certain that there are solid empirical foundations of this. And on the other hand, I think it's important not to label children straight away. I think there are ways to talk about feelings and emotions and maybe sensitivity, or without labeling them. And I think that is important. And on the other hand, and in addition, I would say, when they're also introverted and maybe even shy, which I know can happen obviously quite easily as well, I think it is good to find this sort of fine line between pushing them a little bit into situations and challenging themselves a little bit, but on the other hand, and also make sure that it's okay to say no, or that it's okay not to go to every party, you know, or whatever it is that, you know. So I think that is sort of a bit of a fine balance. And I think in relationships, I think one way to help is just to read about it. You know, if you're, you know, if you have the suspicion your husband might be highly sensitive, or your brother, or your father, or your boyfriend, or your son, I think just to read about it, and, you know, not to shame them for being particularly emotional, and maybe also, you know, appreciate the depth of processing. So appreciate that you might have a man in front of you who thinks a lot, and who shows a lot of empathy, and who, you know, is emotional. I mean, as you said earlier, I think women should, I mean, you don't want someone who's sort of constantly, you know, in tears, you know, but on the other hand, I think you want, surely it's quite nice to have a man who has some emotional depth to him.
Yes.
So I would say, you know, read about it, and then, you know, don't shame the people, don't label them too much, and then just see what, you know, what you can appreciate in your sensitive partner.
Awesome. Awesome. And I'm assuming it also requires some personal growth on the significant others and the parents' part too, to, you know, shed some of the perceptions that we have. But we're getting to the end here, but I want to make sure I get to something else that you do that's wonderful, and I wanted to talk about. You founded the European Center for High Sensitivity. Is that, did I read that correctly?
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
So tell me, what is it that you
that's
all
perfect.
do?
Yeah.
What do you guys do over there?
So I founded the center about 5 years ago, and what I basically, I mean, the book took up a lot of time. So the book, the Highly Sensitive Men, I started writing in 2015, around about the same time as the center, and it took me 2 years to write it, and then it was first published in Germany in 2017, and has been translated into several languages, and then it came out last year in the US, and the paperback version just came out last month in the US paperback version. So it took up quite a lot of time, and I had grand plans with the center initially, but what I've been doing basically since I set it up is to offer HSP consultations, so you know, one-to-one consultations, and the idea was eventually to offer groups as well. I've become a father last year on top of that, so I had to sort of, you know, scale back a little bit of the work with the center. But what I still do is definitely consultations, and I also started doing workshops for highly sensitive people. So I've just done a workshop at the beginning of the year in the Netherlands, and Rona allows, then hopefully there will be more workshops in the future.
Okay. So it is my understanding that you help highly sensitive men and women, correct?
Yes, that's right. That's right. So the HSP consultations are for men and women, really. The reason why I wrote the book was really because you know, a book for highly sensitive men just didn't exist when I started writing it. It wasn't particularly my plan to, you know, to focus just on masculinity and you know, work with highly sensitive men, but because there wasn't such a book available, I wanted to write the book. And then of course now I get a lot of you know, a lot of men contact me, highly sensitive men who seek consultations, but I'm always super happy when women read the book, and I often get really, you know, sweet emails from readers who found it really helpful. And of course, if women want consultation, you know, I work with them as well. So yeah.
Okay. Now we've been spending a lot of today talking about the highly sensitive man and the traits of that. But I'm wondering, is there something wrong with the man who, you know, goes off with his shotgun on the weekend hunting and jumps out of planes and beats his chest or whatever? I mean, is that man okay too?
Yeah, whatever works, you know, whatever works for you. You know, I think as long as you're, I mean, I think I really try with the, you know, in the book, I talk, the first part of the book is theory and is, you know, I summarize a little bit the research. I talk a bit about mental health in men. I talk a bit about the changes of masculinity. And then the second part of the book is practical, and it's sort of practical tools, how to deal with, you know, the aspects that come with high sensitivity, like how to deal with difficult feelings and how to calm yourself, and, you know, offer a bit of mindfulness and imagery,
Okay.
you know, techniques. But what was really important to me writing the book is I think is having an inclusive tone. I think I don't want to make high sensitivity to some sort of, you know, exclusive club, and you know, here we have the pure sensitive souls, and here we have the, you know,
The
so I think I'm not really
barbarians.
interested in that. So, exactly. So I think whatever works for you and doesn't harm anyone, you know, it's all good. It's all good. And I think it's also important to remember that, you know, a lot of highly sensitive men might not come across as particularly sensitive straight away. So they might be highly sensitive, and they might be high sensation seeker. So they might, you know, really be keen on, you know, adventure and change and facing challenging situations. They might jump out of a plane with a, you know, with a parachute, or so it comes in all shapes and forms. And I really think most important is a diversity in masculinity. So if you want to, you know, shoot some, I don't know, use your gun for, you know, safely, or engage in very typical, let's say typical masculine behaviors, I think that's completely fine. But I think it's, as I said, I think it's important to broaden a little bit the masculinity, basically, and to allow, that is fine, but let's start talking about feelings, you know, that's okay too, that's important too, you know. So I think that's important, you know, to bring it together and to really, you know, seek a diversity.
Awesome, awesome. Wonderful, wonderful information today. I always hate this. This 30 minutes goes so fast, Tom. Well, we're going to do the random question, and then I want you to tell
Okay.
everybody how they get in touch with you. So let's see what we've got here. Totally
Okay.
random. Let's see what we got.
Okay.
What is the most useful thing your mom or dad has taught you?
Oh God.
I told you it was random.
um, okay, I think it's being authentic.
Okay.
I think the importance of being authentic. I think that is something that they taught me, and that is something that that I'm very appreciative of. That they taught me that, and I think that is very important to me in my life.
Yes.
Whether it's as a therapist or as a, you know, in my private life, authenticity I really seek, and I really appreciate it in others.
Yes, indeed. This world would be such a better place if so many more of us were able to grasp that concept. You know, we have a tendency to want to go out into this world and project whatever image we feel people need from us, instead of being who we truly are. So I think authenticity is
Yes.
wonderful, wonderful. So Tom, please tell everybody how
Yes.
they pick up the
Yes.
book and how they reach you and all of that stuff. Because you're way over there in Berlin and I'm over here in America.
Should I
So,
hold it in the?
huh.
So here's the book.
There you go. Let's see here. There we go.
Highly Sensitive Man.
Okay.
And it's available. It was published last month as a paperback. You can order it from everywhere, really. And you can, I've got a website, which is hsp-eu.com. And I'm also on Instagram. A bit reluctantly, but I thought I'll do that. And yeah, so my website is there, hsp-eu.com, or Instagram, and the book is available everywhere, really.
Awesome. Yes, I'm with you on Instagram. Social media seems like such an intrusion to me sometimes, but you know, we have to do it. We're in this lifestyle, so some things we just have to.
Exactly, and I think it's a question of how you use it. So,
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Well, Tom, I appreciate you. Thank you for making time to hang out with me, especially with the little one. I know all of that stuff gets chaotic, and I want you to stay safe and healthy in these interesting times we find ourselves in. So please
definitely. Thank you very much for the conversation and for the great questions.
Awesome.
And thanks for having me. And stay safe and all.
All righty. That is all for this week's show. I will be back next week, and I'll see everybody next time.